I'm 48 years old and I've been married for almost 20 years. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in a broken home with alcoholic parents, so trust is a big deal to me. I need structure, safety, and stability in my life. I met my wife while working at a restaurant where I was the manager, and she was a young employee, 5 years my junior. Her parents passed away in a car accident when she was just a toddler, and she was raised by her uncle. As a result, she has serious abandonment issues, can be highly emotional, and sometimes even rageful. Despite this, she's mostly a kind and loving person. Over the past 2 decades, I've been there for her through thick and thin, helping to calm her soul and temper her anger. As time passed, she began visiting me more frequently at the bar where I worked part-time. One night, about a month after we first met, she walked in, strode right up to me, and leaped into my arms, locking lips with me. At that moment, I couldn't resist her advances. I mean, who would turn down a young, vibrant woman who was obviously attracted to them? After a month of her coming down to my bar to visit, she walked in one night, approached me, jumped into my arms, and started kissing me. I couldn't resist. I mean, who could? This stunning, lively girl was obviously very attracted to me. I had just got out of a 5-year-long disastrous marriage and was trying to get back into the dating scene. I was in shape, enjoying the company of several women, and ready to mingle. When this attractive, energetic girl came into my life, I couldn't resist. We spent the night together, and the next day, I told her that if she wanted to keep seeing me, she had to quit her job at the restaurant where we worked together. To my surprise, she put in her notice that very day. We were inseparable from then on. She practically moved in with me, and we gathered all her belongings from where she was staying a week later. I ceased seeing other women and had to even reject one of them who came to my workplace and said she had to hide. I declined, telling her I was in a committed relationship. She urged, "No one will know," but I knew, so I stayed loyal to my girl, and the other woman left. My wife and I were in the early stages of our relationship, and we had our fair share of silly arguments and dating games. But I was done with all that nonsense. One night, she chose to stay out with her friends instead of coming home with me, and that was the final straw. I went to our apartment, gathered all her belongings, and dumped them on our doorstep. I sat on the couch and waited for her to return, ready to have the talk that would change everything. I caught a glimpse of the headlights from her friend's car as they pulled up and dropped her off. Peering through the peephole, I watched as she approached the doorstep, and he stood there petrified, gazing at all her bags lined up in front of her. I opened the door and saw the tears rolling down her cheeks. I spoke to her, trying to comfort her in the best way I could. "I'm done with these games. I'm right here in front of you, and it's time to make a choice. You gotta love my daughter, take care of me, and I'll do the same for you. If you can handle that, then grab your stuff and come inside." She stepped inside, and we've been together ever since. In the first few years of our marriage, I was a complete mess. I got myself 2 DUIs and cheated on her more times than I could count. She had no idea about my infidelity and never found out about it. But after my second DUI, she sat me down and told me she loved me, but couldn't handle it anymore. She gave me an ultimatum, saying that if I ever got another DUI, she would leave me. That was my wake-up call. From then on, I was a changed man and devoted myself to being the best husband I could be. For the next 20 years, I devoted myself to building my career. I accepted job offers from various parts of the state, and even had to relocate over an hour and a half away from our hometown for one of them. However, my wife had a hard time adjusting to the new environment. By then, we already had a baby, and she felt isolated. So I made the decision to move her back to town. For the next 7 years, I commuted to work and back, which was extremely challenging. But I did it because I wanted to provide for my family and make sure they were taken care of. After some time, a position opened up in my company in our hometown, and I took it without hesitation. Soon after, I was approached by a private owner to manage his businesses, which I did successfully. Finally, another private group offered me an ownership stake to run their units, and I accepted the opportunity. After being together for 15 years, I had finally made it to the top of my career. My family was doing great, and my bank account was looking pretty impressive. My wife came to me with a desire to go back to school to further her education, but I was so busy with work that I didn't really pay much attention to it. As the years passed, the atmosphere at work became more and more toxic, and it slowly started to wear me down. I became withdrawn and isolated, closing myself off from the world. My relationship with my wife began to suffer as a result. We hardly ever had any closeness, only a few times a year, and this was in spite of her having a high desire. I was struggling with depression and felt like I was slowly dying inside, and it was affecting every aspect of my life. As the work environment turned toxic, my wife sought solace in hanging out with our friends while I was at work. Despite feeling uncomfortable with the situation, I was too numb to put up a fight and let her do as she pleased. After all, it was better for her to be out than to deal with my own emotional turmoil. Her outings increased in frequency, but I didn't object as she was spending time with people we had both known for 2 decades. I trusted everyone in that circle. Little did I know I was being foolish. As time went on, I began to realize that my work environment was slowly destroying me. The partners and I couldn't even have a decent conversation without arguing. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had lost sight of everything that mattered to me. I had turned myself into a machine, solely focused on providing financial stability for my family. But what about my own happiness and well-being? It was like I was running on autopilot, going through the motions of life without actually living it. I was like a desert without any emotion. Sure, we had some fantastic family moments over those 20 years, but personally, I felt hollow. I resolved that once my wife finished her studies, I would search for a new way to earn money and rediscover who I was. Just as I was beginning to take a good hard look at my life, my wife started exploring a new path for herself. One of the guys in our longtime friend group, someone I trusted for 20 years, crossed the line and started holding her hand on their outings. It was innocent at first, but soon turned into an emotional affair that lasted for a year. As the year began, I started feeling uneasy every time my wife went out with our friends. It was like a nagging sensation in the back of my head, but I was too emotionally numb to pay much attention. My wife was becoming more distant and aloof, but I just ignored it, not wanting to face any more pain or discomfort. Then, COVID-19 struck, and everything changed. Locked down in our home for months, my wife suggested we use the time to rekindle our relationship and bring new life into our marriage. However, I was still struggling to shake off the emptiness that came with my previous work life, and I found it difficult to make a connection with her at first. The pandemic hit us in April, and by June, my wife had dropped a bombshell. She was planning to leave me after finishing her program. But unbeknownst to me, I was in for another surprise. With no work and more time on my hands during quarantine, I began to reconnect with my buddies. I got an invitation to attend a wedding of one of the guys in our group, and I was thrilled to see them all after more than a year. My wife and I went to the wedding, and I had a blast. However, my wife's emotional affair partner was forced to confront what he was doing when I showed up. He couldn't handle the pressure, and after a second gathering during the same month, he ended the affair altogether. My ex-wife, whom I was married to for 19 years, was caught in a web of multiple dilemmas. Her academic program was almost complete, but our marriage was falling apart, and her secret relationship was also ruined. Despite all of this, she didn't have the courage to confess her intentions of leaving me, as she needed my support to finish her program. However, she began to sow the seeds for her new life, and the truth was bound to come out soon. 3 weeks before my wife was due to take her boards and get her license, she brought up the idea of taking a job at the coast, which was 2 hours away. She claimed that there were no jobs available in town. The salary would be good and she could start working immediately. The next day, she announced that she had an interview. I didn't agree with her plan, and during our discussion, I realized we weren't just talking about her job, but about her leaving me. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice calm but firm. "Let's cut to the chase. What are you really talking about here?" She looked away, fidgeting with her hands. I could tell she wasn't ready to pull the trigger on this conversation. I took a deep breath and continued. "I love you more than anything, but I won't beg you to stay. You're not responsible for me. Don't feel guilty about anything. I took care of you and our family for the last 20 years. But I need to know what you're going to do so I can start putting my life back together." It took me a moment to gather myself. But once I did, the detective work began. I hacked into her computer and dug up old drafts of letters she had written to her AP over the past year. I searched through every nook and cranny of her devices and realized she had stopped syncing them a year prior. As I pieced things together, I stumbled upon the name of her lover. At first, I was taken aback, but it didn't take long for me to realize that it was him all along. I completely arranged an online counseling session for us because of COVID, but it wasn't the same as a face-to-face conversation. I sent all the information I'd gathered and my feelings to our trusted counselor, whom we've seen for 15 years. She was the one who helped us through our ups and downs, and I hoped she could do the same again. On the day of my wife's appointment, I was aimlessly driving around, feeling like I was losing my mind. As I drove through the winding roads of the foothills outside town, I was screaming and howling at the top of my lungs, a raw expression of my guilt and self-blame. It felt like I had pushed my wife away and was solely responsible for the end of our marriage. I felt as if I had violated her trust and wanted to disappear into thin air. I had this intense urge to point my truck at a brick wall and crash into it at 100 miles per hour. As I was making my way back home, feeling a bit more composed, my phone rang and I saw it was my wife calling. I couldn't bring myself to answer it. I just couldn't find the words. Later, I found out that during their counseling session, our therapist mentioned AP's name, and it sent my wife into a panic. She was rattled and couldn't comprehend how our counselor knew about her affair. That's when she decided to check my iPad and found all the incriminating evidence I had gathered. She started calling me frantically, not to confess, but because she was worried about AP. Can you believe it? As my wife and I talked, she expressed her fear of me confronting AP, saying that it wasn't his fault and he didn't deserve any of this. But she seemed to forget that AP and I had been good friends for 20 years, and his betrayal was just as significant as hers. This was just one of many conversations that followed a similar pattern. We would argue, talk things out, and then try to resolve to keep working on our relationship. I start attending counseling sessions alone, and the therapist tells me that my wife will have a tough time moving on from the emotional affair she had with AP. The therapist also reveals that my emotional unavailability contributed to the affair, and that it was a strong bond that will take time for my wife to let go of. It's a hard pill to swallow, but I know it's true. I reflect on how I worked tirelessly for 20 years to provide for my family, sacrificing my own needs in the process, but none of that mattered to my wife. She felt alone in our marriage, and that's what led her to seek comfort elsewhere. The weight of my guilt is crushing. As we continued with counseling, I found myself grappling with trust issues. I fought the urge to snoop through my wife's devices, desperate to uncover any ongoing communication or physical involvement between her and AP. Deep down, I knew that the damage had already been done, but the thought of them still being in contact tore at me. I delved into the world of infidelity, watching videos and reading books about how to regain trust. After cheating, most of the experts recommended that the cheater should offer complete access to their devices and communications if they genuinely want to rebuild trust. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew deep down that I needed that access. Still, I couldn't bring myself to ask for it just yet. I was emotionally fragile, scared to death that my 20-year marriage was slipping away, and I felt powerless to assert myself or make any demands of my wife. I was paralyzed by the thought that I had let her down. Every conversation felt like a minefield that I had to tiptoe through. On the bright side, our physical connection rekindled, and we were going at it like rabbits, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. In those first couple of weeks after I uncovered her betrayal, we were closer than ever before, and it was mind-blowing. But during the intervals between those moments of closeness, the loneliness was unbearable. After a few weeks, I couldn't resist the urge to reach out to AP, so I did. I texted him, informing him that I had uncovered his affair with my wife. I admitted that I had contributed to the situation by not being present emotionally in our marriage, and that I wanted to talk things through with him. I suggested that the 3 of us could move on and continue being part of our tight-knit group of friends without any awkwardness. But there was no response from him, just silence. As I was driving to work the next day, my phone buzzed with a text from my wife, asking if I had contacted AP. I hesitated for a moment before lying and saying no. Her response was swift and to the point. God damn it, don't lie to me. Later, I discovered that AP was no longer responding to my wife's messages on their preferred app, Snapchat, leaving her messages unattended. She quickly realized that I had contacted him, and he was likely spooked. I decided to come clean and admitted that I had indeed reached out to him, but it was not about her. I explained that it was about the long-standing friendship I had with AP and that I wanted to try and salvage what I could for the three of us. My wife was furious, but she didn't waste any time in leaving our home to meet with AP at his place. As a side note, I couldn't help but think to myself, Snapchat? Really? Are we in high school? As I drove home from work, I knew something wasn't right. My wife had left in a hurry to meet with AP, and I had a sinking feeling in my gut. When I called her, she was short with me and asked for some time alone. It wasn't until later that I found out she was messaging him during that time, but he wasn't responding. When I finally made it home, we talked for hours about everything that had happened. We made love and fell asleep in each other's arms, but I knew that things were far from okay. My wife asked me not to contact AP anymore unless he reached out first, and I reluctantly agreed, but inside I felt like a fragile little shell, barely holding it together. This was the worst feeling in the world. We spent every moment together, hyper-aware of each other's every move, word and glance, each carrying a weight of its own. It was like trying to decode a cryptic message with every interaction. It drained us both, so we decided to take a trip out of town, hoping to escape the lingering presence of AP. As we worked to repair the damage that had been done to our 20-year marriage, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something was still being kept from me. And then, one day, while shopping at a Lowe's, an alert appeared on her phone. My heart sank as she turned away to enter her code, confirming my fears that she was still keeping secrets from me. I felt like we were stuck in a never-ending cycle of pain and mistrust. I knew that something needed to be done to move forward, so I contacted AP again and arranged a meeting. He agreed to it, and I didn't tell my wife until the day of the meeting. About 30 minutes before I was due to leave, I told her that I was meeting with AP. Her previously loving expression turned into a nasty scowl. She told me that she wouldn't be there when I got back. I was taken aback by her reaction and almost canceled the meeting, but I knew it needed to be done. "What are you guys going to do? Talk about what a piece of crap I am?" she asked me. I reassured her that the meeting was about my relationship with AP and not just about her. I exited and rendezvoused with AP at a pub. We ordered a few rounds of drinks and dove right into it. He told me about his recent breakup and how my wife's affection had helped him overcome his depression. I retorted, "Yeah, except for the explicit photos she sent you and the dirty talk that went along with them." His eyes fell to the ground and he conceded that it had gone too far. As we talked, I could feel the weight of the situation crushing me. I tried to keep it together, but the alcohol made it difficult. After about an hour of conversation, I headed back home. Unfortunately, when I arrived, wife was nowhere to be found. She'd gone out for a drive to clear her head. In my drunken state, I stumbled into bed and passed out. She came back around 1 a.m., and I was roused from my slumber. Apparently, she had stopped by our friend's place and ended up having to pick up our daughter. When she returned home, she wasted no time in asking me what was discussed during the meeting with AP. I reiterated that it was about salvaging what was left of our friendship and not about her. We talked some more, made love again, and then drifted off to sleep. The back and forth between feeling intimately connected with my wife and betrayed by her was taking a toll on me. In my therapy session, my counselor emphasized that there should be no communication between my wife and AP if we were to move forward. She stressed that continued contact would only hinder my wife's ability to move on from the affair. I agreed with her. The therapist also advised that my wife should allow me access to all of her devices to rebuild trust, rather than leaving me to do all the heavy lifting. It made sense, and I hoped my wife would be willing to follow through. As I brought up the issue of trust with my wife, she simply replied, "I can give you the code if you want." Her response was not what I had hoped for. I wanted her to hand over her phone and tell me the code. It was clear to me that she was bluffing, but I didn't call her out on it. I felt so powerless, still struggling with my own emotional weakness. In the following therapy session, my counselor laid it out straight. I was being a pushover, a doormat. I was allowing myself to be spoiled for emotional love from my wife, and it was hindering our chances of making it long-term. The counselor advised that the wife should block AP on all social media and grant me full access to her devices. I agreed to bring it up with my wife, hoping she would see the necessity for this level of transparency. Wife and I hit the road for her job on the coast, and as we were figuring out where to chow down, I suggested finding a quiet spot so we could chat. I rode my bike with her, and we planned to stay at a hotel for a couple of nights before I headed back home for work on Wednesday. It was our third week of this routine, and I needed to lay down some ground rules before going back. We had talked about her blocking AP the previous day, and she had given her word. I felt like a scared little puppy when it came to discussing the boundaries with wife. We were having such a great time together, and I didn't want to ruin it. But I knew deep down that we needed to establish some rules if we wanted to move forward. So, during dinner, I nervously brought up the topic and reminded her of the therapist's suggestions. I asked her to delete and block AP on all her social media and to give me access to all her devices. It was tough for me to bring it up because I was afraid of getting into a fight and saying something terrible that would ruin everything. But I knew it had to be done. Wife was hesitant to give me the code to her phone, but eventually relented. She agreed to the boundaries we had discussed in therapy, and I felt like we were making progress. But then I asked her, "Did you delete the AP from Snapchat?" She replied, "I unfriended him." I told her that wasn't enough, and she responded, "I did whatever it takes to make him disappear from the app." I should have asked to see her phone, but I knew she was lying, and I didn't want to spoil the rest of our evening. So we finished dinner and went back to our hotel. I made a decision that night. It had been over a month since I had slept peacefully through the night. I knew that I would wake up in the middle of the night, so I made up my mind to take my wife's phone into the bathroom and examine everything. And once I found all the lies, I would hop on my bike, leave the hotel, and move on with the rest of my life. Wife had an early shift, so we hit the hay at 9 p.m. I had my bags packed already, ready to leave in the dead of night. Wife thought I was getting my stuff ready for departure the following day, so there were no signs of concern from her. Around 3 a.m. I got up, crossed over to her side of the bed, picked up her phone off the charger, and made my way to the bathroom. I unlocked the phone and launched Snapchat. I had even Googled how to check friends' lists on the app to see if she had removed him. But I didn't need to because a notification of a message from AP popped up as soon as I opened the app. I clicked on the message and found out that they had been chatting back and forth all night long. I didn't feel anything at that moment, not angry, not hurt, not even sad, just deeply disappointed. I started going through her phone methodically, taking pictures of every single message, every picture she sent him, and even her texts to the one friend she confided in. When I felt like I had everything, I returned the phone to its charger, got dressed, and left. At 7 a.m., I received a text from wife asking where I was. In response, I sent her a screenshot of her conversation with AP from the previous night. She immediately panicked, her strong facade crumbling to pieces. She begged for another chance, apologized for betraying me, and promised to delete the app and give me full access to everything. She swore that she only ever loved me and would do anything to keep us together. I told her we would talk when she returned home on Friday. 6 weeks have passed since that night. Wife did delete the app, and it seems like we're getting back on track. We're trying to create the marriage we always wanted, but the doubts are still there. I can't help but check over her shoulder whenever she's using her phone, wondering if she's hiding something. Every time I enter a room, I scan to see if she's quickly closing out of a secret messaging app. That day I found out wife was still messaging AP. I decided to confront him. I told him in no uncertain terms to back off, and that he was destroying our marriage by continuing to communicate with her. He went radio silent after that, but not before leaving some snide remarks about her, saying that he was trying to respond in a short and concise manner, hoping that eventually it would stop. Later on, I showed wife the message and it hit her hard. It was painful to witness her disappointment, but it was also a moment of release for both of us. Hopefully, this would help her move on and rebuild our relationship. I can't believe we made it through that nightmare, but my mind still wanders, and I can't help but wonder what they were doing behind my back while I was right next to her, or on our family vacations. Time has passed, and my doubts have simmered down a bit, but they are still present. I don't think she would ever do this again, but there is always a chance she could change her mind and leave me. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I could stay either. All I want is to grow old with her, to live out our days together.